Thank you, Ben. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up. It's a little early. It's nice to see so many familiar and friendly faces in the audience. I really appreciate that. That's really important about the city is that we're really good to each other as a community, and I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for coming out this morning. Like Ben mentioned, my name is Gerren Lamson. He also mentioned I am a designer, an illustrator, and a typographer. I'm also the Chief Creative Officer for a startup platform called Creative Market, which I'll talk a little bit more later about. And so, looks like I'm not getting some notes in my slides. There we go. Okay, this is the slide we actually wanted. But the best way for me to approach this idea of the theme backwards that I'm going to talk about today is through my design experiences. And those experiences range from the past to the present, and then get to look forward into the future. So in that spirit, I want to start at the very end. And at the very end, I'm talking about the conclusion. So here are some themes I hope we can take away from this talk today about this discussion about backwards. I hope we can look backwards. And by that, I mean I hope we can see where we've come from and make connections from the past to the present in our own personal lives. And I hope those sort of illuminate the path forward for us. I also hope that we can see differently in the type of work that we do, that we can find unconventional ways to solve problems and approach our projects a little bit differently from the end, working back to the beginning. So having said that, I think it's really important that first we redefine the meaning of the word backwards. Historically, it predates 1200 AD, and it's always meant sort of walking towards a direction with your back first. And we've also had these other phrases that are pretty derogatory, like bending over backwards or doing things back-asswardsly. So historically, it's meant things that have more of a negative stigma to them. And it's also meant being behind in terms of progress, doing things the old school way or in a less advanced state. It's also meant going the wrong way. People are perceiving that you're not doing things the normal or the right way. And it's also meant, very strongly and commonly about looking back and having a lot of regret about what you've done, dwelling on your mistakes, that hindsight is 20/20, people often say. But I think what we need to do today is create some positive associations with the word backward, and those are sponsored by my friend Marty McFly here. It's kind of washed out, if you can see him. So looking back, I think we can investigate the past with curiosity. And that curiosity will lead us to those connections that I'm talking about. It's very important to stay curious as a way of looking back. I think also that we can look at the way in which how things have been done in design, specifically for me, who was doing them, why they were solving the problems, and how they were arriving at those processes and methods, and look at non-traditional ways of solving our work today. I also think that we need to have a healthy amount of retrospection, that we need to contemplate on our personal journey. It's extremely important. Like Ben said, I'm a very pensive guy. And that, to me, is really the major theme of today, that looking back can help you see your future. Thoreau said it really well, or rather, he said, never look back unless you're planning to go that way. And so what I'm suggesting this morning for us is that we actually go back, that we go that way. That's where we're headed. So wait for it. Who's this little guy? This is a very nervous 6-year-old me sitting on top of a very unfortunate alligator that met its end. In full disclosure, I'm from South Louisiana, so this makes more sense now. Grew up in a family of 5 kids, and I was the quiet one, believe it or not. And so my dad decided to take me on this rare alligator hunt. We never did this. This wasn't a normal occasion. For some people it is, but it wasn't for us. And I was really afraid in this experience. But eventually I got over it. And, well, except for that really creepy Cajun guy on the right. He was really hard to get over. But looking back, this picture is a really good reminder for me of a common theme about my life, that I would get into these very uncomfortable and challenging situations. And then what I learned from this is that I had to be brave and just go ahead and do it to move past them. Much like giving this talk today, which is atypical for someone more introspective like me. But it also reminds me that in the past, we'll all have lots of ups and downs and challenges, And that also is a theme that we can look at today, that we will continue to have both ups and downs. And for me now, I'm actually better equipped to handle them as an adult than I was as a 6-year-old in this situation. But instead of alligator hunting, when I was a kid, what I really wanted to be doing was I wanted to be drawing. That's really what I would have rather have done that day. And Milton Glasser says it really well. He says, drawing is how I think, and I totally relate to this. He also goes on to mention that designers need to be drawing and learning to draw as a way to think. And so I did it a lot when I was a kid. And so I thought maybe, I'm getting ahead of the game a little bit because I'm drawing all this time. But actually, when I was a kid, all I could think about was Star Wars. And so this is what my sketchbook like for years, even not paying attention in class. I did character doodles. I would, draw all of them multiple times, do ship illustrations, draw out the, elaborate battle scenes from the movies. It was very hard in pencil to capture Chewbacca's hair. I labored over that so much. But I ended up giving these really cool drawings away to my friends. I would also trade them to them for all kinds of random things in school. In particular, one brings back a memory of doing my favorite drawing for my Trekkie friend. So you can imagine that drawing the Imperial Star Destroyer from Star Wars versus the USS Enterprise was really an awesome thing to do, but it created a lot of arguments between us. And we never really knew who won. There was never, oh, you won this time, you had a better argument. But it was really a lot of fun. But beyond drawing, I had a lot of other creative hobbies, such as learning to play the piano and cooking and crafting, inventing board games to subject my friends to, designing video games that I thought would be cool if they existed. And looking back, a lot of this diversity, what it showed me was that I was trying to discover what was really sticking and getting to something beyond trying out all these different mediums. Because what's really interesting to me is that a lot of times our past hobbies and also our present hobbies can become our future passions. And although mine didn't directly correlate, I'm not drawing Star Wars for a living, that's not what's going on, but I'm doing some interesting things that are close to what my passions in my youth were. And I think, they can be subtle when you look back on your life, the things that you did that you're interested in, the curiosities that you had, need to be paid attention to. And they need to keep us up at night. They need to be the things that we want to chase after and pursue. Because eventually, I think they can become a starting path for the type of work that we want to do if we're not already doing it. So for me, as an adult, I actually still have a lot of hobbies. And they're centered around the idea of drawing, or actually just drawing itself, related things to, like printmaking. So the thing for me is what they do is they satisfy this need to constantly be exploring, to constantly be experimenting. And that's really important. It creates ongoing education. I've learned to screen print, to do lino cuts and other printmaking techniques, and got into doing a lot of hand lettering and a lot of contour line drawing. And what's cool is a lot of this stuff ends up showing my work later on. But the main takeaway from it is I think we need to be playing visually. I think we need to play first and then work second. And later on, those things will start to merge. But what's important to me is to visually play without the intention of sharing it online. Because I think when we start to make things with the idea that someone else is going to see it and it's got this purpose for this audience, we don't give ourselves the freedom to fail. And that's really important because once you spend a lot of time playing and failing, you end up coming to a lot of the really cool stuff, I think. Another way to describe this for me is to say that being creative is for the sake of satisfying our curiosity. And this is not easy by any stretch. I mean, I spend countless hours doing all kinds of side projects and hobbies. A lot of them are awful, and I fail at my own even passion projects. But what happens along the way is they end up transforming me in some small way, especially in my design thinking. And that's really crucial and valuable. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my failures, if you'll allow me. After high school, I got in my Ford Exploder with my older brother, and we drove from Louisiana all the way to Oregon, where I went to school, Portland State. And so it was really important. I left the nest. I thought, I'm going to go conquer the world and go away for college. But I had no clue what I was going to sign up for in school. I had a lot of these creative hobbies, and so when I read about what design was, which I had never heard about, it kind of made enough sense that, yeah, I'll pick that. So I kind of stumbled into it. And I think as designers, you'll hear a lot of us say we stumbled into design. I literally did. I had no idea what I was getting into. But what was the problem was getting into college is that I wasn't really drawing anymore. And I was becoming a little bit obsessed with music. And this is me in my early 20s, holding a fuchsia pink Roland SH-101 keytar. And I spent hours writing really mediocre electronic music. I mean, hours. It never saw the light of day. I never shared it. Which is funny because I thought, like, yeah, I'm going to make it in music, but I never put anything out there. I don't know. That's crazy. But during this season, I had a really high output of creativity, just like when I was a kid, but in a different medium. And looking back, I actually can see some really cool design thinking education that was happening within the space of songwriting and arrangement and music production. But a couple other things looking back that I learned is that if you ignore a return on investment in what you're creating, that you can be more creative. But for me as a college student, that just made me more broke. And so what I ended up doing was I just continued to labor, and I tried everything with music, writing acoustic songs, writing just electric songs, writing those two different mediums together. And then I would also remix that stuff. I'd take it apart and try to understand the individual elements and see how they could come back together as a whole multiple times. But this is what my creative cycle looked like. And I would get a new idea, have a really high output of creativity, and then I would just completely fail. I couldn't arrive at a final product. And then once I would step back and see that, I would get in there and try to edit and fix it and just create a whole bunch of more failures. So in the words again of Milton Glasser, he says, you must embrace failure. Well, I did this way too much. I celebrated my failure on a weekly basis, not only in music, but also in my college projects. I wasn't really spending the time in my design education that I should have been. I was doing music, so I really did college the wrong way when I was in college. But eventually what I learned is that I needed to focus. It was a very important piece of this cycle in the editing and refinement stage. And once I sort of found how to focus, I was able to complete projects, and they were successful. I still didn't put them online, but I had a sense of accomplishment. And that would energize me, so it would get me back into this creative cycle. But when I was young, it still didn't matter because my work was really bad. And this is a look at a lot of my early web design work. I think it's important, again, to share your failures. There's a lot of them on this screen. They were for small businesses, but what I ended up doing is I designed for web and I learned code. I did that wrong as well. I actually used Microsoft Front Page. If anyone's ever heard of it, it's terrible. And the code it puts out, it's terrible. But it taught me to go be resourceful on the internet and to fix those code problems. And eventually, I formally learned CSS and HTML. Thankfully, I got a lot of my bad web work out of the way much early on. You can even see a glimpse of my first portfolio in the bottom left screen there. It's really awful. But back to my college journey, I actually went full cycle, and I moved back home to Louisiana. So again, while it's important to venture out, I think it's even more important to return from where you came from, especially after going out. It just really will do a lot for you in your journey. And so in the process for me, I got back into college and finished back in Louisiana. I also met my wonderful wife, Morgana, which is amazing that that happened in this process. And I finished my bachelor's degree of fine arts and graphic design. But I wanted to share what my senior project looked like. And this is what I made for my senior project. It was a line of home goods for a brand that I made up called Domus. And I got to collaborate on this with my wife, which was really awesome. We would stay up late at night hand-making soaps and custom herb seed kits and teas and the packaging for all this stuff. And the collaboration was really awesome. I was used to working by myself, which was one of my pitfalls. So I think we need to more immediately and quickly collaborate with each other. But this foreshadowed a collaboration that 8 years later we sort of picked back up. And today we do things under this moniker called Satchel and Sage. So while I'm not making home goods, I'm making art products together with her, printed goods and textiles, and we're focusing on illustration and patterns. And the co-creation process it's fantastic for me because working together produces much more interesting results. It's more efficient. And all together as designers, it gets us out of that thing we do where we go into a cave with blinders on and just want to solve a problem by ourselves. But what's even more important is that working together produces better personal growth for me, especially with people you trust when you do projects with them. And coincidentally, we're actually going to have a booth at the Renegade Craft Fair at the Palmer Events Center this weekend. So if you are into that kind of thing and want to come check it out, definitely come by and say hi. But to sum up a lot of these past experiences that I was looking back on, the late Steve Jobs says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in the future. And the key word here for me is trust. You have to trust in yourself that you've made good choices along the way. You have to trust that that connection will be made. There will be a bridge between things you did earlier and what you're doing now. And also, it's really interesting to me because you have to trust in each other when you collaborate. And again, most of the times we start working by ourselves first, but collaboration, I think, a lot of times needs to be the way we start things. So I actually work for a startup now. And how I got into working into that is a very backwards path. I've been working in agencies for a long time, traditional agencies, interactive, advertising. I did it for many years. But how I really got there was side projects. And I had this passion to try to create a font, which I did. It's called Prova. Not long ago, I made it with the intention of using it to be paired with some illustrations for a freelance project for Soup Peddler. Has anyone heard of Soup Peddler here? Yeah, he's amazing. He really is a local hero. His soups are just completely delicious. Getting hungry. But after I finished it, it was a very successful project. I decided, well, maybe I'm going to put this out there and try to sell it on my website. And I got a really good reception, and it really encouraged me, so I actually kept going. I made a lot of fonts, and each one was very hard to make. They were all done as side projects on the side. I stayed up late at night. It took a few days to do lettering of each. Took a few days also to kern and code them. But every single one produced very unexpected results for me when I shared it online. In particular, they opened up communication with some really nice startup folks who eventually got me working with them on their platform called Creative Market. So for those of you who don't know, Creative Market is a marketplace platform for designers who want to sell their digital design content. So I was selling my fonts, and now I'm building a platform for other people to sell their own assets. As a company, we're really passionate about helping beautiful design become simple and accessible to everyone. And we're really interested in putting all the all the features in the favor of the seller. And we also do a really good job of the community and customer support on our platform. But what I wanted to show in this slide was the homepage, which is on the right. And something really interesting happened for us. So we focused on the entire experience first, and then we designed the homepage last, which is really different to me. I think a lot of us in web design want to tackle the homepage first, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense if you don't know what you're talking about, if you haven't built out the full range and facet of your platform. So we did the homepage last, and it let us put together a really good experience for first-time visitors. And I really recommend and encourage anyone in web work to do the homepage last, which people will probably not usually do. But we didn't just come up with Creative Market from scratch. There's a big backstory here. We just didn't say, oh, we're going to make this platform. It came from the co-founders working on other platforms for years. So there's a real labor and a long story there. They worked on Color Schemer and Color Lovers, which some of you may have heard of, as well as Chameleon. And these were all tools for folks to make beautiful color palettes and then to use those in their projects and also share them with their community. And I think because they had these other platforms, what they did was they rallied a really amazing community for themselves before we even got into Creative Market. Because even though we were focused on color palettes, eventually, by the demand of the community, those turned into patterns and turned into graphics and fonts and all kinds of other digital assets. And thus, that's why Creative Market is now what we're doing. And many times, I think this backwards approach of taking a really long time while you're working on one thing and then to see it evolve into something completely different, that's the organic and natural path that interests me. And it's also the one that I think transforms us into better people making more meaningful work. But I want to share one example of our process of how we do some things at Creative Market. So as a designer, a lot of times we're used to just jumping into Photoshop and tackling a problem and working on it and then handing it off. But what was really important to our platform was this really unique purchasing experience we wanted to put together. The idea was that the buy button would open up and you can handle your login and sign up in there, also your credit card information, and end up completing the purchase and getting a receipt. And so this was a really neat idea. We had it way early, and then we just shelved it. We didn't do anything with it. We waited all the way to the end. And so at the end, what we ended up doing was collaborating in person. The developer, way back in the beginning, put together a very loose prototype, and then we got together in New York, and this was the last piece we worked on, and it went so much faster for the developer to start right at the beginning, or even before the beginning. We were able to mitigate potential pitfalls and problems in the design that otherwise in Photoshop would have completely put a wrench in the process. And we also discovered better choices to make, and we continue to evolve this because of the education and findings that we had by doing it together in person and collaborating. So again, like, designers like to be in a cave with blinders on, working in Photoshop for 2 months and handing something off. But what was really impactful for me personally was to do this in tandem with the developer who was controlling what was happening, and we were brainstorming and having really great discussion around it. It's a really cool part of the site. I hope that you check out the site, particularly this experience, and maybe it'll make you buy something like this Star Wars, again, inspired product I put together called Mothma. Still curious about Star Wars, you know, made some of the buttons, the green lightsaber and the red lightsaber colors, some of the grays inspired by the Death Star. Completely nerdy. Full disclosure, complete nerd. But what's important for me personally is while I spend most of my time working on the platform for other people to make products, I still take time to do things on the side and keep myself curious, keep honing and refining my skills, because I've seen really good things happen from that in the past for me, and that's still true today. But what I really love most is supporting other people. And so again, I think where we get it wrong is we focus on ourselves first and then we focus on community. But what I hope these talks turn into is focusing on the community first and then sharing our individual stories to see how they weave together and have overlap. And so this is a slide of a lot of the products that people are making, and they're meaningful resources, and they're changing these people's lives. They're really helping their peers by making these products do better design work for their clients and for themselves. Some of our sellers are taking their old personal side projects or client work that never saw the light of day and recycling it and retrofitting it and making some products for other people. Others are using it as an educational platform, so they'll go learn how to do really awesome watercoloring and turn those into Photoshop brushes. And others are actually looking at the whole marketplace and finding needs that it's hard to see that their peers have, and then trying to fill those things directly with unique products. And so all of these people are discovering a very backwards way of making a living, which is really exciting to me. It's a new way to go beyond the traditional 8 to 5, and I hope to see it continue to grow. But with that, I'd really like to say is I hope that we continue to try to see things differently and backwards, that we look back at our own life and see past experiences and how they play into what we're doing today, and that we continue to try to think differently about the way we're working so that we can solve problems more efficiently. Thank you very much for coming.